I was just listening to an interview with the process theologian and philosopher John Cobb Jr., and he's pretty pessimistic about the planetary situation right now. He was talking a lot about economics and the way that economic power is presently distributed around the planet, or maybe not distributed, but rather the way that power, economic power, is highly centralized, um, such that a few very large financial banking institutions and investment firms control the affairs of the world, control the political and to a large extent cultural affairs of the world, because they control the media, they control the universities, they control the government, they control everything. So there's, it's not the 1% versus the 99%. It's the 0.01% really versus the 99.9%. And it's not as though political power doesn't still lie with us. I think with us, meaning the democratic peoples of the civilized world, we could nationalize the banks tomorrow if we really wanted to. We just have to learn to recognize how to use our political power. We've kind of forgotten or been lulled to sleep by the corporate-owned media to make us think that what democracy really is just, every 4 years or maybe every 2 years, if we're really paying attention, we go vote in a national election, and that's all we need to do to be political. We go vote for representatives, career politicians who, they can be political for us, right? We sort of outsource our own political action to these representatives, and we hope that they don't just take bribes and vote for what the lobbyists tell them to vote for, but rather that they rule guided by justice. Of course, they don't. They do take bribes. The laws are written by corporations, and when the politicians are done working in the House or the Senate or the executive branch, they go into the private sector, and because they're the only ones that can understand the laws that they enacted while they were in the public sector, they are hired by the private sector with tremendous salaries. They'll make 10, 15, 20, 100 times more than what they were making as public servants working, for the private firms. So really, I think for many politicians nowadays, getting into the game of political representation is a kind of investment in one's future, because after you've been elected to public office, you'll most likely be able to get a job making way more money for a private corporation. So, John Cobb Jr. sort of talking about all of this, and he doesn't see a happy ending here. He's a theologian, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's optimistic about the human predicament, because his God, as a process God, as a kind of God that, a variation at least on the God that Alfred North Whitehead articulated, the 20th century mathematician, physicist, and metaphysician, kind of God that Whitehead articulated is not the sort that could reach in from beyond and fix things. There's not like at a certain point in history, God intervened with an otherwise mechanical system that had been working according to its own laws before that, entirely without God's help. For Whitehead, the divine is always already involved in the world, and what we call the laws of physics are really the habits of God. God is nothing other than the present uh, and past and future experience of the universe. God is what it is like to be the cosmic event in which we finite human consciousnesses will wake up amidst. So, there's a whole other question about what our relationship as finite individual human consciousnesses is to the infinite, the universal, divine consciousness. Another way of asking that question, I think, is to ask, well, what is the relationship of metaphysics to everyday life? To politics, to economics, to even more concretely, just our social existence, our psychosocial existence here amongst one another, um, with friends and relatives and loved ones. What is the relationship of metaphysics, right? The most abstract form of theory that humans have ever been able to imagine, to concrete existence? Because people like John Cobb and Whitehead, they're talking about metaphysics as if it had some effect upon how we behave every day, what we value, what we do, who we are. And I obviously agree that metaphysics is intimately wedded to our everyday existence. But for most people, and because it takes a lot of time to become a metaphysician, just like it takes a lot of time to become an expert at anything. You have to soak yourself in the tradition and the history of philosophy, in the history of doing metaphysics, in order to do it yourself. It's sort of a rite of passage. A close study of the history of philosophy is the necessary initiation into the metaphysical life. But maybe what I'm kind of asking here is what is the proper relationship of the philosopher, of the one who has the time and the desire to enter into the history of philosophy and to try to understand what all these crazy guys and gals, there were a few gals, Anne Conway, Mary Shelley, there were plenty of female philosophers, but certainly they're mostly males. Metaphysics seems to be a peculiarly male obsession, for better or worse. And I think we need more women to help untangle the various knots that that a masculine approach to metaphysics has tied us in. But okay, mostly dudes. What is the philosopher's role, whether male or female, in the larger society? It's another way of asking, what is the relationship of metaphysics to daily life? And how do we start approaching answers to these questions? John Cobb Jr. mentioned that even those people of the lay public, the uninitiated, philosophically uninitiated public, when they hear the word metaphysics, their eyes glaze over and they immediately lose interest, or just become confused and nonplussed about what the hell is even being talked about. But what John Cobb Jr. says is that even the person who denies the possibility of metaphysics or the importance of it has a metaphysics, because really one could not, as soon as one starts to try to give reasons for why they do the things they do, why they think the way they think, they immediately enter into the metaphysical arena. As language-using animals, we are metaphysical entities. The very basic act of being or becoming a self, if you'll forgive my clumsy attempt to integrate stasis and genesis with a compound word like becoming a self is a metaphysical act. the fact that we are able to establish some semblance of identity that endures from day to day, even from hour to hour, minute to minute. It's an astonishing fact. So one could deny metaphysics even as a sophisticated intellectual thinker. Empiricists have been doing this forever, denying the possibility of metaphysics. Kant denied the possibility of metaphysics in his own way by offering a new kind of transcendental metaphysics. It talked about the conditions for the possibility of knowledge of things rather than pretending to offer knowledge of things themselves. Right? That's the transcendental move. But if you're an empiricist, like Hume, you're going to deny metaphysics by saying that, well, there is no self, really. It's just a bundle of impressions that glob together as a result of habits that we form. And if you're Hume, you're going to deny the reality of causality, or at least our ability to know whether causality is real. So you're going to say that the whole physical world is just, all that we can know about it are the patches of bare sensation, like color and various forms of touch and texture and stuff, that our imagination synthesizes together into a coherent picture for us, but that in reality is totally beyond our reach. This is Hume pretending to deny metaphysics while himself doing a kind of metaphysics, right? All of that I just said, and Hume's whole attempts to offer a phenomenology of our conscious experience and reflective awareness of experience is a sort of metaphysics, right? So when one reads Hume, let's say that something doesn't sit right with you, you're going to respond to it, and immediately, even in the philosophy of someone, the most anti-metaphysical philosopher you can think of, that's sort of a major figure in the tradition of Western philosophy is Hume, and yet what else is he doing but metaphysics? So if we're going to talk about our experience, if we're going to think about who and what we are, we're going to need to do metaphysics. And then it becomes a question of, well, what kind of metaphysics? Traditionally, much of the mainstream of Western philosophy has been built up around being. In other words, around eternity and identity and oneness, unity, and so on. And marginalized in the Western tradition have been, the opposite ideas, or the opposite poles of the mainstream, which would be, instead of being, becoming, instead of eternity, time, instead of unity and oneness and identity, difference and manyness, and plurality. These are repressed ideas in the history of philosophy. And I think when we try to think with someone like Alfred North Whitehead, we are trying to think pluralistically about the universe. So Whitehead's often called a process philosopher, but that's not because he's dismissing all of the really well-established, well-argued ideas of the Western philosophical canon based around being, identity, and eternity, and all of that. It's not like he wants to totally dismiss that. He just wants to show its one-sidedness and correct for that lopsidedness with an emphasis on process and an emphasis on experience rather than reflection or abstraction. So in many ways, Whitehead really wants to bring together Leibniz and Hume. Whitehead is an empiricist ultimately, but he's a radical empiricist in that he sees the relations between things as just as real as the things themselves, which is another way of saying, you know, the qualitative feel of the world is just as ontologically fundamental as the quantitative, um, measured, objective being of it. So Whitehead, as a radical empiricist, is going to want to include more in the category of experience than someone like Hume, a more traditional empiricist, who's defining experience only according to what we receive through the five senses, the sort of sensory universals like colors and shapes and general figures that impress onto our souls through our senses. Whitehead is going to want to question that rather Cartesian understanding of what experience is, and draw our attention instead to the body and to the various schemas and habits that shape our somatic way of being in the world, of walking in the world, of breathing the air, tasting our food, digesting our food. Whitehead wants to pay attention to those dimensions of experience that Hume ignored, or at least didn't thematize in his philosophy. He's an astute phenomenologist, Hume, and Whitehead admits that, but he wants to pay attention to affect and the way that it feels to be in a body, not just to what we think the body sees. The categories that we invent in our language to describe what the body thinks it sees. So it's 20 minutes of metaphysics for you. I'll post a link to the John Cobb Jr. Interview that sparked some of these thoughts. But if you made it this far, thanks for listening.